Springfield, Illinois, March 15, 2019. Lincoln Middle School stood as it had for nearly 80 years, a 3-story brick building that had educated generations of children in this quiet Midwestern community. The structure carried the architectural remnants of a different era, with its high ceilings, wide hallways, and a labyrinthine basement that few people ever needed to explore. On this particular Friday afternoon, as students filed out of classrooms and headed home for the weekend, 58-year-old Timothy Clark prepared for what seemed like routine maintenance work that would change everything. Timothy had worked as the head custodian at Lincoln Middle School for 12 years. His days followed predictable patterns, unlocking doors each morning, maintaining the grounds, responding to the inevitable spills and mishaps of middle school life, and securing the building each evening. He took pride in his work, knowing every corner of the old building, every creaky floorboard, every temperamental radiator. Colleagues described him as thorough and observant, someone who noticed when things were out of place or when something didn't quite fit the normal rhythm of the school day. So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from. The maintenance project scheduled for that March weekend involved clearing out old storage areas in the basement to make room for new athletic equipment. The school board had finally approved funding for updated gym materials, and the basement storage room near the boiler had been designated as the new equipment depot. Timothy arrived early that Friday afternoon, well before the final bell, to assess the scope of work ahead. The basement storage area hadn't been thoroughly organized in years, and he anticipated finding forgotten textbooks, broken furniture, and the accumulated debris of decades. As Timothy descended the concrete stairs into the basement, the temperature dropped noticeably. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the corridor that ran the length of the building. He wheeled a large rolling cart behind him, planning to sort items into categories: donation, disposal, and preservation. The storage room door stuck slightly as he pushed it open, its hinges protesting with a metallic groan that echoed in the empty hallway. The room measured approximately 20 feet by 15 feet, its walls lined with metal shelving units that sagged under the weight of cardboard boxes, old textbooks, and equipment that had been obsolete for years. Timothy began systematically working through the shelves, creating piles and making notes about what needed to be removed. An old overhead projector from the 1990s, boxes of outdated geography textbooks showing countries that no longer existed, broken microscopes from the science department, athletic trophies from championships won decades ago. After 2 hours of sorting, Timothy reached the back corner of the room where a large wooden cabinet stood against the wall. The cabinet appeared to be original to the building, constructed from heavy oak that had darkened with age. He had noticed it before, but never had reason to move it. Now, with the room being completely cleared, the cabinet needed to be assessed and likely removed. Timothy grabbed one side and pulled, expecting the weight to be substantial. What happened next caught him completely off guard. As the cabinet shifted away from the wall, approximately 6 inches of space opened behind it. But instead of revealing the concrete wall he expected to see, Timothy found himself staring at what appeared to be a door frame. He stopped pulling and leaned closer, using his flashlight to illuminate the gap. The beam revealed a door, painted the same institutional beige as the surrounding walls, with a handle that showed signs of use despite being hidden behind the cabinet. Timothy's first thought was that he had discovered an old maintenance access point, perhaps leading to utility lines or the building's ancient heating system. The school's construction dated back to an era when buildings often contained coal chutes, dumbwaiters, and other features that had been sealed off or forgotten over time. He continued pulling the cabinet away from the wall, the heavy furniture scraping across the concrete floor with considerable effort. With the cabinet fully moved aside, the door stood revealed in its entirety. It measured standard size, approximately 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The handle appeared to be a simple lever type, not original to the 1940s construction, but rather a more modern addition from perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. Timothy noticed something else that struck him as unusual. The floor directly in front of the door showed signs of wear, subtle scuff marks suggesting the door had been opened and closed with some regularity, despite being hidden behind the cabinet. He reached for the handle and pressed down. The mechanism moved smoothly, well-maintained, and recently used. The door swung inward without the resistance or squeaking he would have expected from a sealed-off utility room. Timothy shone his flashlight into the darkness beyond, revealing a small room that definitely was not original to the building's construction. The space measured roughly 10 feet by 12 feet. Unlike the unfinished concrete of the storage room, this hidden area had been modified with drywall and painted a neutral gray. The floor was covered with industrial carpet tiles, the kind found throughout the school's upper floors. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, connected to a pull chain. Timothy pulled the chain, and the bulb illuminated what appeared to be a deliberately created and maintained secret space. The room's contents immediately set off alarm bells in Timothy's mind. Along one wall stood a metal shelf containing what appeared to be personal belongings: backpacks, jackets, a few pairs of sneakers. None of these items looked particularly old or abandoned. In fact, they appeared to be contemporary, the kind of things students currently used. On another shelf sat a collection of notebooks and binders organized with apparent care. A small folding chair sat in one corner, and a more disturbing detail caught Timothy's attention: a camera on a tripod, positioned to face the door. Timothy's pulse quickened as the implications of his discovery began to register. This was not an abandoned utility room or forgotten storage space. Someone had deliberately created this hidden area and had been using it recently. The presence of what appeared to be student belongings, combined with the camera equipment, suggested something far more sinister than a forgotten corner of an old building. He backed out of the room carefully, his mind racing through the procedures he needed to follow. This discovery required immediate notification to administration and likely law enforcement. Timothy made his way back upstairs, his thoughts churning through what he had just found. The building suddenly felt different, as if the familiar hallways and classrooms now concealed darker secrets than he had ever imagined. Principal Amanda Peterson was in her office, completing end-of-week paperwork, when Timothy knocked on her door. He explained his discovery with as much detail as he could manage, watching her expression shift from curiosity to concern to barely concealed alarm. She immediately contacted the superintendent's office and then placed a call to the Springfield Police Department. Within 30 minutes, 2 patrol officers arrived at the school to secure the scene and begin an initial assessment. The officers descended into the basement with Timothy and Principal Peterson, documenting the hidden room with photographs and preliminary observations. They noted the items present, the condition of the space, and the disturbing implications of a secret room containing what appeared to be student property. The senior officer, a veteran with 20 years of experience, immediately recognized this as a situation requiring detective involvement and forensic examination. By 6 o'clock that evening, Detective Sarah Mitchell of the Springfield Police Department arrived at Lincoln Middle School. At 43 years old, Mitchell had built a reputation as a thorough and relentless investigator, particularly in cases involving children and educational institutions. She had worked in the juvenile division for 5 years before transferring to major crimes, bringing with her a deep understanding of how predators operated and the patterns they followed. Detective Mitchell's initial walkthrough of the hidden room confirmed the officer's assessment that this was a crime scene requiring careful processing. She ordered the area sealed and contacted the forensic unit to begin evidence collection. The backpacks and notebooks would need to be carefully cataloged, and any potential DNA evidence would need to be preserved. The camera equipment would require technical analysis to determine if it had been used for recording and if any footage could be recovered. As the evening progressed and more personnel arrived to process the scene, Timothy Clark remained at the school, providing whatever information and assistance the investigators required. He retraced his steps, explaining exactly how he had discovered the door and describing the position of the cabinet that had concealed it. Investigators photographed everything, including the scuff marks on the floor that Timothy had noticed, the wear patterns on the door handle, and the precise arrangement of items within the hidden room. The initial inventory revealed troubling details. 5 backpacks, each containing personal items and school materials. 7 notebooks with names written on the covers. 3 jackets bearing school logos. Various personal effects including water bottles, hair accessories, and electronic device chargers. Every item appeared to belong to a different student, and none of the belongings looked old enough to have been there for more than a few years at most. Detective Mitchell made the decision to expand the investigation immediately. The school would need to provide records of any reported thefts or missing items over the past several years. Parents would need to be contacted to identify whether the items belonged to their children. Staff records would need to be reviewed to determine who had access to the basement and who might have known about the space behind the cabinet. Security footage, if any existed for the basement areas, would need to be obtained and analyzed. As midnight approached, the evidence collection continued under bright portable lights that cast stark shadows across the basement corridor. Principal Peterson sat in her office upstairs, beginning the difficult task of reviewing incident reports and preparing for the conversations that would need to happen with parents and staff. Timothy Clark finally left the building around 1 a.m, the familiar hallways now transformed into something unsettling and strange. The discovery of the hidden room marked the beginning of an investigation that would ultimately expose years of calculated deception operating within the walls of Lincoln Middle School. What Timothy Clark had uncovered in those moments of routine maintenance work would prove to be far more extensive and disturbing than anyone initially imagined, setting in motion a chain of revelations that would shake the entire Springfield community to its core. The weekend following Timothy Clark's discovery brought no rest to the investigators working the Lincoln Middle School case. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the police station Saturday morning with a singular focus: identifying the owners of the items found in the hidden room and determining how long this secret space had been in operation. The evidence collected Friday night now filled 2 large tables in the department's evidence processing room, each item carefully tagged and photographed according to protocol. Mitchell began with the notebooks. 7 spiral-bound books, each bearing a name written on the front cover in youthful handwriting. The names provided the first concrete leads: Isabella Thompson, Marcus Johnson, Emily Rodriguez, Hannah Mitchell, no relation to the detective, Christopher Lee, Sophia Anderson, and Jacob Williams. Cross-referencing these names with current and former student records at Lincoln Middle School revealed a disturbing pattern that would define the direction of the investigation. All 7 students had attended Lincoln Middle School within the past 3 years. More significantly, all 7 had filed reports with school administration about missing personal items during their time at the school. These reports, which Mitchell obtained from Principal Peterson on Saturday afternoon, had been logged as routine theft incidents, the kind of unfortunate but common occurrences in any school environment. Backpacks disappearing from hallways, jackets taken from gymnasium locker rooms, personal items vanishing from desks during lunch periods. Each incident had been noted, parents had been informed, but no pattern had been identified because the thefts occurred sporadically over an extended time frame. The detective's next step involved the difficult task of contacting families to inform them of the discovery and request their assistance in identifying the recovered items. These conversations, conducted throughout Saturday and Sunday, brought a mixture of shock, relief, and growing anger from parents who had assumed their children's missing belongings were simply lost or stolen by other students. Rebecca Thompson received Detective Mitchell's call Saturday afternoon. Her daughter Isabella, now 17 and attending Springfield High School, had reported her backpack missing during her 8th grade year at Lincoln Middle School, approximately 2 years earlier. Rebecca remembered the incident clearly because the backpack had contained not just school supplies, but also a journal where Isabella documented her thoughts and experiences. The loss had been particularly upsetting to her daughter, who felt violated by the theft of something so personal. When Rebecca and Isabella arrived at the police station Sunday morning to identify the recovered items, the confirmation hit with emotional force. The purple backpack with distinctive patches that Isabella had carefully selected was indeed among the items from the hidden room. More disturbingly, when the contents were inventoried in their presence, Isabella's journal was there, along with photographs that she had kept in a front pocket. The realization that someone had taken these items and hidden them away for 2 years, maintaining access to her personal thoughts and images, left Isabella visibly shaken. Similar scenes played out with other families throughout the weekend. The Johnson family identified Marcus's black athletic backpack missing from a school field trip 18 months earlier. The Rodriguez family confirmed that a navy blue jacket with Emily's name embroidered on the sleeve had indeed disappeared during her 7th grade year. The Mitchell family, again, no relation to the detective, recognized Hannah's distinctive messenger bag that had vanished during an after-school program. Detective Mitchell noted a crucial detail emerging from these family interviews: the timing of the disappearances. The incidents hadn't occurred randomly throughout the school year. Instead, they clustered around specific periods when students participated in after-school activities, tutoring sessions, or stayed late for extracurricular programs. This pattern suggested that the perpetrator operated during times when the building was less crowded and supervision was reduced. By Sunday evening, Mitchell had confirmed that all 7 notebooks and 5 of the backpacks belonged to students who had reported thefts between 2016 and 2019. The remaining items were still being processed and matched to incident reports. The detective now faced the critical question: who had access to create and maintain this hidden room, and who had the opportunity to take items from students during after-school hours? The investigation expanded to examine Lincoln Middle School's after-school programs. The school offered various activities between 3 and 6 o'clock on weekdays: athletic practices, drama club, student government, and most significantly, a tutoring program that provided academic support in math, science, and language arts. This tutoring program, which had operated for nearly a decade, served students who needed extra help or wanted to improve their grades before high school. Records obtained from the school showed that all 7 students whose notebooks were found in the hidden room had participated in the after-school tutoring program at some point during their enrollment at Lincoln Middle School. The program coordinator and primary tutor was Gregory Foster, a 45-year-old mathematics teacher who had worked at Lincoln Middle School for 8 years. Foster's personnel file presented a concerning portrait despite an outwardly professional record. He had joined the school district in 2011 after teaching at 2 previous schools in neighboring counties. His employment references had been adequate, though not enthusiastic, describing him as competent but somewhat distant with colleagues. Student evaluations varied, with some praising his patience and clear explanations, while others found him overly focused on certain students and somewhat uncomfortable in his teaching approach. More troubling details emerged as Mitchell dug deeper into Foster's background. Before his teaching career, he had worked in various positions that brought him into contact with young people: a summer camp counselor, a youth sports coach, an assistant in a community center. His employment history showed a pattern of relatively short tenures at each position, typically 2 to 3 years before moving to a new location and new role. This pattern of mobility and frequent position changes raised red flags for the detective, suggesting someone who might be attempting to stay ahead of questions or concerns. The investigation took a decisive turn Monday morning when Detective Mitchell, accompanied by 2 other officers and armed with a search warrant, arrived at Foster's residence in a modest apartment complex on Springfield's east side. Foster had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, and the school had cooperated fully in providing his address and contact information. Foster answered the door Monday morning with an expression that Mitchell would later describe as simultaneously surprised and resigned, as if he had been expecting this moment but hoped it wouldn't arrive. The detective presented the warrant and explained that they would be searching the premises for evidence related to the investigation at Lincoln Middle School. Foster initially attempted to assert his rights and question the basis for the search, but ultimately stood aside and allowed the officers to enter. The apartment itself was neat and sparsely decorated, the home of someone who either didn't plan to stay long or preferred minimal attachment to physical surroundings. The living room contained basic furniture, a television, and bookshelves lined with mathematics texts and educational materials. The kitchen showed little sign of regular cooking. The bedroom was orderly, with carefully made bed and minimal personal effects visible. The search, however, revealed elements that Foster had worked to conceal. In a locked filing cabinet in the bedroom closet, officers discovered documents that demonstrated a disturbing level of attention paid to specific students at Lincoln Middle School. Folders contained printed schedules showing when certain students participated in after-school activities. Notes documented observations about student behaviors, routines, and personal characteristics. Photographs, apparently taken surreptitiously in school hallways and common areas, showed students engaged in normal activities, unaware they were being documented. More damning evidence emerged from Foster's computer, which forensic technicians began analyzing at the apartment. The browsing history, which Foster had attempted to delete but which could be recovered through standard forensic procedures, revealed searches related to surveillance techniques, how to create hidden spaces in buildings, and concerning queries about student privacy laws and the limitations of school security systems. In a desk drawer, investigators found a set of keys that Principal Peterson would later confirm included copies of master keys that provided access to most areas of Lincoln Middle School. Foster's position as a teacher didn't authorize him to possess such keys, suggesting he had either copied them without authorization or obtained them through deceptive means. Perhaps most significantly, technicians discovered in Foster's apartment a small notebook that appeared to function as a journal or log. The entries, written in Foster's handwriting, documented his activities at the school over several years. References to the basement storage area appeared frequently, along with notations about times when the building was least occupied and which students were present for after-school activities. Some entries included troubling observations about students' appearances, behaviors, and personal characteristics that went far beyond anything appropriate for a teacher's professional notes. By Monday afternoon, Detective Mitchell had gathered sufficient evidence to justify Foster's arrest. At 4 o'clock, with 2 officers accompanying her, she returned to Foster's apartment and placed him in custody. The charges, which would certainly expand as the investigation progressed, initially included burglary, possession of stolen property, and unauthorized possession of master keys. Mitchell informed Foster of his rights and transported him to the Springfield Police Department for booking and initial questioning. Foster exercised his right to remain silent, refusing to answer any questions about the hidden room, the stolen items, or his activities at Lincoln Middle School. His attorney, appointed from the Public Defender's Office, advised complete non-cooperation with the investigation. This silence, while frustrating to investigators, wasn't unexpected for someone facing serious charges. The arrest of Gregory Foster sent shockwaves through Lincoln Middle School and the broader Springfield community. Parents who had entrusted their children to his teaching and tutoring now grappled with the possibility that he had been conducting surveillance and stealing personal items for years. Students who had worked with him after school tried to reconcile the patient tutor they remembered with the person now facing criminal charges. Principal Peterson held an emergency meeting with staff Monday evening, informing teachers and administrators about Foster's arrest and the ongoing investigation. The school board scheduled a special session for Tuesday to address the situation and begin implementing immediate changes to security protocols and supervision procedures. Mental health counselors were brought in to support students who might be affected by the news. Detective Mitchell, meanwhile, faced the challenging task of expanding the investigation. If Foster had been operating for 8 years at Lincoln Middle School, there might be additional victims who hadn't reported missing items or who didn't realize they had been targeted. The detective needed to review every incident report from Foster's entire tenure, interview students who had participated in his tutoring sessions, and determine the full scope of his activities. The hidden room in the basement yielded additional evidence as forensic examination continued. Fingerprints found on items in the space matched Foster's prints from his employment records. DNA samples collected from surfaces in the room also provided matches. The camera equipment found in the space was being examined to determine if it had been used for recording and whether any footage could be recovered from memory cards or connected devices. As Monday night turned to Tuesday morning, the investigation had established a clear suspect and gathered substantial evidence linking Gregory Foster to the hidden room and stolen items. But Detective Mitchell understood that this case extended beyond simple theft. The level of planning, the secret space, the surveillance equipment, and the detailed documentation suggested something more calculated and potentially more sinister than opportunistic stealing. The detective's next steps would focus on understanding Foster's true intentions and ensuring that all victims were identified and supported. The community of Springfield, meanwhile, struggled to comprehend how such a situation had developed unnoticed for years within their middle school. Parents questioned what signs they might have missed and what systems had failed to protect their children. The discovery that Timothy Clark had made days earlier continued to unfold into an ever more complex and disturbing investigation. with each new revelation raising additional questions about what else might still be hidden in the shadows. Springfield, Illinois, March 22, 2019. 1 week after Timothy Clark's discovery, the investigation into Gregory Foster had expanded far beyond the initial findings in the hidden basement room. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat in her office at the Springfield Police Department, surrounded by evidence boxes, interview transcripts, and forensic reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of systematic predatory behavior masked by the respectable facade of an educator. The forensic analysis of Foster's computer had yielded results that transformed the investigation from a case of theft into something far more serious. Technical specialists had spent 5 days recovering deleted files, analyzing browsing history, and reconstructing Foster's digital footprint. What they discovered revealed a man who had spent years carefully researching, planning, and executing a strategy to gain access to students while maintaining the appearance of a dedicated teacher. The recovered files included detailed documents that Foster had created over his 8 years at Lincoln Middle School. These were not lesson plans or educational materials, but rather extensive profiles of specific students. Each profile contained information that went far beyond what any teacher would legitimately need to know. Detailed descriptions of students' physical appearances, notes about their daily routines and habits, observations about their family situations and home lives, and assessments of their vulnerabilities and emotional states. The profiles focused particularly on students who shared certain characteristics. They tended to be academically struggling, came from single-parent households or families dealing with financial stress, and displayed lower self-confidence. Foster had apparently identified these students as individuals who would be more receptive to extra attention from a caring teacher and less likely to question unusual requests or situations. The calculated nature of this targeting demonstrated a level of predatory sophistication that deeply concerned investigators. Further examination of Foster's documents revealed that he had maintained detailed logs of his interactions with students in the after-school tutoring program. These logs noted when students arrived, how long they stayed, whether they came alone or with friends, and which areas of the school building they used. The level of detail suggested constant monitoring and careful documentation, as if Foster were conducting surveillance operations rather than providing educational support. The investigation into how Foster had created the hidden room provided additional insights into his methodical approach. Detective Mitchell interviewed maintenance staff and reviewed school renovation records going back to 2011, when Foster first joined Lincoln Middle School. The detective discovered that during the summer of 2013, the school had undergone significant basement renovations to upgrade the heating and cooling systems. Foster had volunteered to help coordinate the work, claiming he wanted to be useful during the summer months when teachers weren't required to be present. Construction crews working on that renovation remembered Foster being unusually interested in the basement layout and structural details. He had asked numerous questions about which areas would be modified, which spaces would remain untouched, and how the new systems would be accessed. At the time, his curiosity had seemed like the natural interest of someone trying to understand his workplace better. In retrospect, it appeared he was gathering intelligence to identify a location where he could create a concealed space. Building plans obtained from the school district showed that the storage room where Timothy Clark made his discovery was originally designed as a larger open area. At some point, between the 2013 renovation and the present day, someone had constructed an interior wall that reduced the storage room's size and created the hidden space behind it. The construction had been done professionally enough to avoid immediate detection, but building inspectors confirmed it had never been permitted or officially documented. Detective Mitchell theorized that Foster had used the chaos and access provided by the 2013 renovation to construct the hidden room, possibly with the help of outside contractors who believed they were doing legitimate work for the school. The detective tracked down several construction companies that had worked on the project, but after 6 years and multiple business changes, finding specific workers who might remember details proved challenging. The question of how Foster obtained master keys to the school also found its answer through diligent investigation. School security records showed that in 2014, a set of master keys had been reported missing by a maintenance supervisor. The incident had been logged, Locks had been changed in sensitive areas, but not all locks throughout the building had been replaced due to budget constraints. Foster, through his involvement in after-school programs and his tendency to arrive early and stay late, would have had numerous opportunities to copy keys before their loss was reported. As investigators built their understanding of Foster's methods, they also worked to identify additional potential victims beyond the 7 students whose belongings had been found in the hidden room. Detective Mitchell's team conducted extensive interviews with current and former students who had participated in Foster's tutoring program over the past 8 years. These interviews, conducted sensitively with parents present and mental health professionals available, revealed a pattern of boundary violations that had gone unreported or dismissed. Multiple students described situations where Foster had engaged in behavior that made them uncomfortable, but which they hadn't recognized as inappropriate at the time. He frequently offered rides home to students who missed their buses, always with plausible explanations about safety and helping out. He would sometimes touch students' shoulders or backs in ways that felt slightly too personal, but could be explained as friendly encouragement. He showed unusual interest in students' personal lives, asking detailed questions about their home situations, friendships, and activities outside school. Several students recalled that Foster had a habit of keeping them after tutoring sessions ended, claiming they needed extra help or that he wanted to discuss their progress. During these one-on-one interactions, he would sometimes close the door to the classroom, saying it helped reduce distractions. He occasionally gave students small gifts, pencils, notebooks, snacks, which seemed like kind gestures, but which investigators now understood as classic grooming behavior designed to create feelings of obligation and special connection. One particularly troubling pattern emerged from these interviews. Multiple students reported that items had gone missing from their bags or lockers during periods when they were working with Foster in the tutoring program. At the time, they had assumed the thefts were coincidental or perpetrated by other students. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and the context of the hidden room discovery, these incidents took on a more sinister significance. The investigation expanded to include Foster's employment history at his previous schools. Detective Mitchell contacted law enforcement and school administrators in the counties where Foster had worked before coming to Springfield. This outreach revealed a disturbing pattern that explained Foster's frequent moves between districts. At Foster's first teaching position in Jefferson County, parents had complained about his overly familiar behavior with students and his insistence on spending time alone with particular children. The school had counseled him about maintaining appropriate boundaries, but had not formally disciplined him. When his contract came up for renewal, the administration had quietly decided not to offer him another year, providing neutral references that allowed him to move to another district without his record following him. Similar situations had occurred at his second teaching position in Madison County. Students had reported feeling uncomfortable around Foster, though they struggled to articulate exactly what bothered them. The school had investigated but found no clear evidence of misconduct. However, administrators had encouraged Foster to seek employment elsewhere, again providing references that emphasized his teaching abilities, without mentioning the concerns that had been raised. This pattern of institutions quietly moving problematic employees along rather than formally addressing issues or alerting subsequent employers was unfortunately common. Each school had avoided potential conflict and liability by allowing Foster to resign and move on, inadvertently enabling him to continue his behavior in new environments with unsuspecting victims. Detective Mitchell's frustration with these revelations was tempered by her focus on building the strongest possible case against Foster. The evidence collected thus far established clear crimes: burglary, possession of stolen property, unauthorized possession of keys, and various violations of school district policies. However, the detective understood that the true scope of Foster's activities likely extended beyond what could currently be proven. The forensic analysis of the camera equipment found in the hidden room had produced concerning results. Technical examination confirmed that the camera had been used to record video, though no memory cards or storage devices had been found in the room itself. Investigators theorized that Foster had removed any recorded media before the room was discovered, possibly during his final visit to the space before Timothy Clark's discovery. A more intensive search of Foster's apartment, conducted after obtaining an expanded warrant, uncovered external hard drives hidden in a false bottom of a dresser drawer. These drives were immediately secured and sent to the police department's digital forensics unit for analysis. The process of examining the drive's contents would take weeks as technicians worked to recover data while maintaining the integrity of evidence for potential prosecution. By late March, the investigation had produced a massive amount of evidence documenting Foster's calculated violation of trust and boundaries over nearly a decade. The school district cooperated fully with investigators, providing records, facilitating interviews, and implementing immediate policy changes to prevent similar situations in the future. Principal Amanda Peterson, while not personally responsible for Foster's actions, faced criticism for the school's failure to identify warning signs or respond more effectively to scattered complaints over the years. The community's response evolved from initial shock to anger as more details became public. Parents organized meetings demanding accountability and reforms to protect students. Local media covered the story extensively, with reporters investigating how Foster's behavior had gone undetected for so long and what systemic failures had allowed him to operate within multiple school districts. Foster himself remained in custody, held on bail that had been set substantially high given the nature of the charges and the likelihood of additional charges being filed. His attorney maintained that Foster would plead not guilty and that much of the evidence being gathered was circumstantial or represented overreach by investigators. However, legal experts following the case noted that the physical evidence, combined with Foster's own documentation, presented a formidable prosecution case. As March drew to a close, Detective Mitchell prepared for the next phase of the investigation, analyzing the contents of the recovered hard drives and determining whether Foster's activities had crossed additional legal boundaries beyond theft and unauthorized surveillance. The detective had seen enough in her career to fear what might be revealed, but she remained committed to uncovering the full truth, no matter how dark it proved to be. The hidden room in Lincoln Middle School's basement had been just the beginning, the visible edge of something that extended much deeper into the shadows of predatory behavior disguised as educational dedication. Springfield, Illinois, March 28, 2019. The Springfield Police Department's Digital Forensics Laboratory had become the center of the Gregory Foster investigation. 2 senior technicians worked around the clock, analyzing the external hard drives recovered from Foster's apartment, carefully extracting data while maintaining the chain of custody that would be essential for prosecution. What they discovered would transform the case from a local school district matter into something requiring coordination with federal authorities. The hard drives contained thousands of files organized in a folder structure that demonstrated Foster's meticulous approach to his activities. The top-level folders were labeled by school year, dating back to the 2011-2012 academic year when Foster first arrived at Lincoln Middle School. Within each yearly folder were subfolders organized by student names, not all students, but rather the specific individuals Foster had targeted for special attention. Detective Sarah Mitchell reviewed the contents with growing concern. The files included hundreds of photographs, most taken surreptitiously in school settings. Students at their lockers, in hallways, sitting in the cafeteria, walking to and from the building. The images themselves were not explicit, but their existence revealed the extent of Foster's surveillance activities. He had been documenting specific students' daily routines and movements for years, creating a visual catalog that served purposes investigators could only speculate about. More troubling were video files that appeared to have been recorded using the camera equipment found in the hidden basement room. The footage showed students entering the concealed space, apparently believing they were participating in private tutoring sessions. Foster had apparently lured students to the room under the pretext of offering them specialized help in a quiet environment away from the distractions of regular tutoring areas. The videos captured these students sitting in the small space, working on assignments, while Foster engaged them in conversations that gradually became more personal and inappropriate. The forensic team noted that Foster had apparently recognized the legal dangers of his surveillance activities. While the videos documented boundary violations and created deeply uncomfortable viewing, they stopped short of capturing any actions that would constitute clear criminal assault. This suggested Foster understood legal boundaries well enough to avoid crossing certain lines, at least in situations where he was recording evidence of his own behavior. However, the digital forensics team discovered another category of files that indicated Foster's activities extended beyond his personal surveillance. Buried in nested folders and partially encrypted were communications that suggested Foster had been part of an online network of individuals who shared concerning interests in children and adolescents. These communications, recovered through forensic techniques, revealed that Foster had been in contact with others who worked in educational settings or youth programs across multiple states. The existence of this network prompted Detective Mitchell to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Crimes Against Children Unit. By federal law, certain types of digital evidence required federal jurisdiction, and the multi-state nature of Foster's communications necessitated FBI involvement. Special Agent Jennifer Coleman arrived in Springfield on March 29th to coordinate with local investigators and determine the appropriate division of responsibilities. Special Agent Coleman's review of the evidence confirmed that the investigation had uncovered a network of individuals engaged in sharing strategies for gaining access to minors, exchanging information about surveillance techniques, and discussing ways to identify vulnerable targets. While the communications stopped short of detailing explicitly illegal activities, they demonstrated a coordinated approach to predatory behavior that extended far beyond Foster's individual actions. The FBI immediately began working to identify other members of this network, using the digital evidence from Foster's hard drives to trace IP addresses, email accounts, and online identities. This process revealed connections to individuals in at least 7 states, several of whom worked in schools or youth organizations in positions that provided regular access to children. The scope of the investigation suddenly expanded from a single predator in one Illinois school to a broader examination of how such individuals found and supported each other. Meanwhile, the investigation of Foster's activities at Lincoln Middle School continued to develop. The analysis of his detailed logs and student profiles had identified 12 students who appeared to have been primary targets of his attention over the years. 7 of these students were the individuals whose belongings had been found in the hidden room. The other 5 had participated extensively in Foster's tutoring program, but had not reported missing items, or at least had not made reports that were adequately documented. Detective Mitchell's team conducted follow-up interviews with these 5 additional students and their families. These conversations revealed that several students had indeed experienced unexplained losses of personal items during their time at Lincoln Middle School, but had not filed formal reports. The thefts had seemed like minor incidents at the time, the kind of unfortunate but unremarkable events that occur in school environments. Only in the context of the broader investigation did these incidents take on significance. One family interview proved particularly illuminating. The parents of a former student named Christopher Lee described how their son had been unusually reluctant to participate in after-school tutoring during his 8th grade year, despite struggling with mathematics and needing the extra help. When pressed about his reluctance, Christopher had mentioned that the tutor made him feel uncomfortable, though he couldn't articulate specific reasons. His parents had attributed this discomfort to typical adolescent resistance to authority and had insisted he continue attending tutoring sessions. Christopher, now a high school sophomore, agreed to speak with investigators about his experiences. He described how Foster had gradually become more intrusive in their one-on-one sessions, asking personal questions about his family life, his friendships, and his feelings about various situations. Foster had occasionally suggested they meet in different locations in the school, claiming certain rooms had better lighting or fewer distractions. Christopher recalled being led to the basement area on at least 2 occasions, though he said they had worked in the main storage room rather than the hidden space. The pattern that emerged from these interviews suggested Foster had been carefully testing boundaries with students, gradually escalating his behavior to gauge their reactions and identify those who might be most vulnerable to manipulation. Students who showed discomfort or resistance apparently received less attention, while those who seemed more compliant or desperate for approval became primary targets for his activities. The school district, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure to explain how Foster had operated undetected for so long. Superintendent Patricia Morrison appointed an independent review committee to examine district policies, training procedures, and response protocols for handling concerns about staff behavior. This review would eventually identify multiple points where warning signs had been missed or inadequately addressed. The committee's preliminary findings, released in early April, acknowledged that the district had received scattered complaints about Foster over the years. These complaints had generally described vague discomfort rather than specific misconduct, and they had been handled individually rather than examined for patterns. The lack of a centralized reporting system meant that administrators in different buildings or departments might not have been aware of multiple concerns about the same individual. Additionally, the review found that background checks conducted when Foster was hired had been adequate for the time, but had not been updated regularly during his employment. His references from previous districts had been neutral to positive, with no indication of the concerns that had led to his departures. The system had essentially allowed Foster to restart his career with each move, benefiting from institutions' tendencies to avoid confrontation and documentation of problematic behavior. Parents and community members organized forums to demand changes. These gatherings, which drew hundreds of attendees, featured emotional testimonies from families affected by Foster's actions. The discussions centered on how to better protect students, how to create environments where children felt safe reporting concerns, and how to hold institutions accountable for addressing warning signs rather than simply moving problems elsewhere. Lincoln Middle School implemented immediate changes even as the investigation continued. The hidden room in the basement was documented, photographed for evidence, and then demolished. The entire basement area was renovated to eliminate isolated spaces and improve visibility. Security camera systems were upgraded throughout the building, with careful protocols established to protect student privacy while deterring misconduct. All staff members underwent new training on recognizing grooming behaviors and mandatory reporting requirements. The after-school tutoring program, which had been suspended immediately after Foster's arrest, was redesigned with multiple safeguards. No tutor would work alone with students in isolated areas. All tutoring sessions would occur in open, visible locations with multiple staff members present. Parents would receive detailed information about program structure and would be encouraged to visit unannounced. Background checks would be conducted annually for all staff and volunteers, not just at initial hiring. As these institutional changes moved forward, the criminal investigation approached a critical juncture. The evidence collected thus far supported numerous charges against Foster, but prosecutors wanted to ensure they filed the strongest possible case that would result in significant prison time and prevent Foster from ever working with children again. The recovered digital evidence was being carefully analyzed to identify every provable offense while building a timeline of Foster's activities that would demonstrate pattern and intent. Foster's defense attorney continued to maintain his client's innocence, arguing that the evidence showed poor judgment and boundary violations, but not criminal intent. The attorney suggested that Foster had created the hidden room as a quiet space for intensive tutoring, that the surveillance equipment was for documenting teaching methods, and that the student belongings had been collected as lost and found items he intended to return. These arguments would ultimately need to be tested in court, where a jury would evaluate the evidence and determine Foster's fate. By early April, the investigation had expanded into territory none of the initial responders could have anticipated when Timothy Clark discovered that hidden door in the basement. What had seemed like a case of theft and inappropriate behavior had revealed itself as something far more calculated and extensive, touching multiple victims and connecting to a broader network of predatory individuals. The full scope of Foster's activities and their impact on students and families would take months, perhaps years, to fully understand. But the commitment to uncovering truth and pursuing justice remained unwavering, driven by the determination to ensure that no child would suffer similar violations in the future. Springfield, Illinois, April 5, 2019. 3 weeks after the discovery of the hidden room, the investigation reached a turning point that would expose the true depth of Gregory Foster's activities and reveal connections that extended far beyond Lincoln Middle School. The FBI's involvement had transformed what began as a local case into a multi-state operation, with Special Agent Jennifer Coleman coordinating efforts across multiple jurisdictions to identify and apprehend individuals connected to the network Foster had been part of. The forensic analysis of Foster's communications had yielded a breakthrough. Technical specialists working with the FBI's Cybercrimes Division had traced encrypted messages to their sources, identifying 12 individuals across 7 states who had been in regular contact with Foster over a 4-year period. These individuals shared a common profile. All worked in positions that provided access to children and adolescents, including teachers, coaches, youth counselors, and school administrators. The communications themselves revealed a sophisticated system of information sharing. Members of this network exchanged strategies for identifying vulnerable students, discussed techniques for gaining trust and avoiding suspicion, and shared observations about security measures at various institutions. While the messages carefully avoided explicitly illegal content, their intent was unmistakable to investigators who understood the patterns of predatory behavior. Special Agent Coleman's team coordinated simultaneous raids on April 8th, executing search warrants at locations in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Missouri. The operation involved over 70 federal agents and local law enforcement officers, all moving at precisely 6 o'clock in the morning to minimize the risk of evidence destruction. The scope and coordination of these raids demonstrated the seriousness with which authorities treated the network's activities. The results of these raids proved even more extensive than investigators had anticipated. At multiple locations, agents discovered hidden storage spaces similar to the room found at Lincoln Middle School, containing personal items belonging to students. Several individuals possessed surveillance equipment and extensive photographic documentation of minors. Computer equipment seized from these locations contained thousands of files that would require months of analysis. In Springfield, Detective Sarah Mitchell focused on understanding the full extent of Foster's activities within her jurisdiction. The ongoing analysis of his records had revealed something that investigators had initially missed. Foster had not worked alone at Lincoln Middle School. Evidence suggested that he had recruited at least one accomplice within the school system, someone who had helped him maintain his activities and avoid detection. This revelation emerged from careful examination of Foster's detailed logs. Certain entries referenced meetings with someone identified only by the initial M, and these meetings appeared to involve discussions of school schedules, student information, and building access. The entries suggested this individual had provided Foster with information about which students might be vulnerable targets and had helped arrange situations where Foster could interact with students privately. Detective Mitchell cross-referenced Foster's logs with school personnel records, looking for staff members whose first or last names began with M. The list included several possibilities: Michael Torres, a physical education teacher; Martha Reynolds, a school counselor; Mark Davidson, the assistant principal, and several other teachers and staff members. Each would need to be investigated carefully to determine whether they had any connection to Foster's activities. The investigation of these potential accomplices proceeded cautiously. Investigators couldn't risk alerting a co-conspirator who might destroy evidence or attempt to flee. Instead, Detective Mitchell's team began subtle background checks, examining each individual's interactions with Foster, their access to student information, and their movements during times when incidents had occurred. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A current Lincoln Middle School teacher named Jennifer Patterson approached investigators on April 10th with information she had been reluctant to share earlier. Patterson explained that she had observed Foster having frequent private conversations with Mark Davidson, the assistant principal, and these conversations had struck her as unusually secretive. The two men would often speak in low voices in isolated areas of the school, ceasing their conversations when others approached. More significantly, Patterson recalled that Davidson had been responsible for handling several of the reports about missing student belongings over the years. As assistant principal, his duties included addressing disciplinary matters and investigating incidents like thefts. Patterson now wondered whether Davidson had intentionally mishandled these reports to protect Foster's activities. Detective Mitchell obtained warrants to examine Davidson's school computer, personal devices, and communications records. The investigation revealed that Davidson and Foster had exchanged hundreds of text messages over several years, far more communication than would be typical between colleagues. While many messages appeared innocuous, certain exchanges used language that suggested coded references to activities they wanted to keep hidden. On April 12th, investigators executed a search warrant at Davidson's residence, a single-family home in a quiet Springfield neighborhood. The search uncovered evidence that confirmed Davidson's role as Foster's accomplice. Davidson possessed files containing student information that he should not have accessed, including home addresses, family situations, and academic records for the same students Foster had targeted. He also possessed keys that provided access to areas of the school where he had no official duties. Most damning was a hidden camera system Davidson had installed in his home office. Analysis of the equipment revealed it was identical to the camera found in Foster's hidden room, purchased from the same online retailer within weeks of each other. This suggested the two men had coordinated their surveillance activities and possibly shared equipment or technical knowledge. Davidson was arrested on April 13th and charged with conspiracy, accessory to burglary, unauthorized access to student records, and abuse of his position. Unlike Foster, who had maintained silence since his arrest, Davidson initially attempted to cooperate with investigators, apparently hoping to negotiate a favorable plea agreement. However, his attorney quickly advised against making statements without a formal immunity offer from prosecutors. The revelation that an assistant principal had been complicit in Foster's activities sent new shockwaves through the Springfield community. Parents who had already been struggling to trust the school system now faced the reality that someone in a position of authority and oversight had actively enabled predatory behavior. The betrayal felt even more profound than Foster's individual actions, representing a systemic failure that allowed misconduct to flourish. Superintendent Patricia Morrison held a press conference on April 14th to address the community's concerns and outline additional measures the district was implementing. The superintendent announced that all administrators would undergo immediate background investigations beyond standard employment checks. A new position of student safety coordinator would be created with direct oversight of abuse prevention and reporting systems. External auditors would review the district's handling of all incident reports from the past decade to identify any other potential oversights or cover-ups. While these institutional responses moved forward, the investigation continued to uncover disturbing details about how Foster and Davidson had operated. Email records recovered from Davidson's accounts showed that he had actively worked to dismiss or downplay concerns about Foster's behavior. When teachers or parents raised questions about Foster's interactions with students, Davidson had conducted superficial investigations designed to find no wrongdoing. He had assured complainants that Foster was simply a dedicated educator who cared deeply about his students' success. Davidson had also manipulated scheduling and room assignments to provide Foster with opportunities to interact with target students privately. He ensured that Foster's tutoring sessions were scheduled during times when administrative supervision was minimal. He assigned Foster to classroom spaces in isolated parts of the building where unusual activities were less likely to be observed. This level of coordination demonstrated premeditation and planning that went far beyond passive enablement. The FBI's broader investigation of the network Foster belonged to revealed similar patterns at other locations. Several of the individuals arrested in the coordinated raids had also worked in pairs, with one person in a position of authority helping to facilitate another's access to victims. This appeared to be a deliberate strategy within the network, based on the recognition that institutional trust and access required insider assistance. By mid-April, prosecutors in Springfield were building cases against both Foster and Davidson. The evidence against Foster included the physical items found in the hidden room, his extensive surveillance documentation, his communications with the network, and testimony from multiple students about his boundary violations. The case against Davidson centered on his role in enabling Foster's activities, his unauthorized access to student information, and his deliberate obstruction of investigations into Foster's behavior. Both men faced the possibility of substantial prison sentences. Illinois law provided enhanced penalties for crimes committed by individuals in positions of trust, particularly when those crimes involved minors. Federal charges related to the interstate network could add additional years to any sentences. Legal experts following the case predicted that Foster could face 15 to 25 years in prison if convicted on all charges, while Davidson might receive 8 to 15 years for his role as an accomplice. The students and families affected by Foster's and Davidson's actions began the difficult process of addressing trauma and rebuilding trust. School counselors worked with identified victims to provide support and resources. Several families initiated civil lawsuits against the school district, seeking compensation for the harm their children had suffered and demanding institutional accountability beyond criminal prosecution. Timothy Clark, whose discovery had initiated this entire investigation, received recognition from the Springfield Police Department and the school district for his vigilance and quick action. However, Clark himself struggled with the knowledge of what had been occurring in the building where he had worked for years. He questioned whether he should have noticed something earlier, whether there were signs he had missed. Counselors assured him that predators like Foster and Davidson were skilled at concealment, but Clark's conscience remained troubled. As April progressed, the investigation entered its final intensive phase before criminal proceedings would begin. Prosecutors reviewed every piece of evidence, preparing for trials that would likely attract significant media attention and public scrutiny. The FBI continued working to build cases against other network members identified through Foster's communications. School districts across the region reviewed their own policies and procedures, desperate to ensure they hadn't harbored similar situations. The case had evolved far beyond the discovery of a hidden room in a school basement. It had exposed a network of predatory individuals who had exploited positions of trust to victimize vulnerable children. It had revealed how institutional failures and misplaced trust could allow harmful behavior to continue for years. And it had demonstrated the importance of vigilance, proper reporting systems, and the courage of individuals like Timothy Clark, who refused to ignore what they found, even when it would have been easier to look away. The path to justice and healing would be long, but the commitment to seeing it through remained absolute. Springfield, Illinois, August 15, 2019. 5 months after Timothy Clark's discovery transformed Lincoln Middle School into the center of a criminal investigation, the community gathered at the Sangamon County Courthouse for the beginning of Gregory Foster's trial. The proceedings would determine not just the fate of one predatory individual, but would also serve as a public reckoning with the institutional failures that had allowed his behavior to continue for nearly a decade. The prosecution's case, led by Assistant State's Attorney Catherine Morrison, presented a comprehensive narrative built on months of meticulous evidence gathering. The trial opened with testimony from Timothy Clark, who described the moment of discovering the hidden room and the immediate realization that something deeply wrong had been occurring within the school's walls. His straightforward account established the foundation for everything that followed. Over the subsequent days, prosecutors methodically presented evidence that painted a damning portrait of Foster's activities. Forensic specialists testified about the contents of the hidden room and the items recovered from Foster's apartment. The backpacks, notebooks, and personal belongings of students were entered into evidence, each item representing a violation of trust and an invasion of privacy. Parents of the affected students testified about the impact of these thefts on their children, describing the violation their families felt upon learning these items had been hidden away for years. Detective Sarah Mitchell took the stand to explain the investigation's progression from the initial discovery through the expansion into federal territory. Her testimony connected Foster's individual actions to the broader network of predators he had communicated with, demonstrating that his behavior was not impulsive, but rather calculated and coordinated. The detective's methodical presentation of evidence left little room for alternative interpretations of Foster's intent. Technical specialists from the FBI testified about the contents of Foster's computers and external hard drives. While carefully avoiding any testimony that might violate privacy or traumatize victims, these experts explained that Foster had maintained extensive surveillance of specific students over multiple years. The surveillance equipment, the hidden room's design, and the detailed documentation all pointed to systematic predatory behavior rather than the innocent misunderstandings Foster's defense team attempted to suggest. Students who had participated in Foster's tutoring program provided testimony that proved particularly compelling. Now older and better able to articulate their experiences, several young people described how Foster had gradually violated boundaries, asked increasingly personal questions, and created situations where they felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to respond. Their testimony illustrated the grooming process that predators use to normalize inappropriate behavior and identify compliant victims. Isabella Thompson, whose stolen backpack had been among the items in the hidden room, testified about the violation she felt, knowing that someone had taken her personal journal and kept it for years. Her testimony resonated throughout the courtroom, forcing spectators and jurors to confront the human impact of Foster's actions. Other victims provided similar accounts, building a portrait of widespread harm that extended far beyond simple theft. The prosecution also called witnesses who testified about Foster's employment history at previous schools. Administrators from his former districts acknowledged that concerns had been raised about his behavior, though they had not risen to the level of formal discipline or criminal referral. These testimonies highlighted the systemic problem of institutions quietly moving problematic employees along rather than addressing issues directly, a practice that had enabled Foster to continue his pattern at multiple locations. Foster's defense team, led by public defender Thomas Richardson, attempted to characterize the evidence as circumstantial and to suggest that Foster's behavior, while perhaps showing poor judgment, did not constitute criminal intent. The defense argued that the hidden room had been intended as a quiet tutoring space, that the surveillance equipment was for documenting teaching methods, and that the student belongings had been collected as lost items Foster intended to return. However, this narrative struggled to explain the encrypted communications with the predatory network, the detailed student profiles that went far beyond educational purposes, and the coordination with Mark Davidson to enable and conceal his activities. The defense's arguments became increasingly difficult to sustain as the prosecution systematically dismantled each alternative explanation with concrete evidence and expert testimony. The trial of Mark Davidson, the assistant principal who had served as Foster's accomplice, proceeded separately but simultaneously in an adjacent courtroom. Davidson's case presented its own disturbing revelations about how someone in a position of authority had actively worked to enable predatory behavior. Evidence showed that Davidson had manipulated incident reports, dismissed legitimate concerns, and provided Foster with access and information that facilitated his targeting of vulnerable students. Davidson's defense attempted to portray him as someone who had been manipulated by Foster, suggesting he hadn't fully understood what he was enabling. However, the evidence of his active participation in concealing evidence and his possession of similar surveillance equipment undermined this portrayal. Text messages between Davidson and Foster revealed knowing discussions of their activities and coordination of their efforts to avoid detection. The trials proceeded through August, with both prosecutions building overwhelming cases that left little doubt about the defendant's guilt. The evidence presented went beyond establishing that crimes had occurred. It demonstrated systematic, calculated predatory behavior enabled by institutional access and protected by deliberate concealment. On August 23rd, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury in Foster's trial returned guilty verdicts on all charges: multiple counts of burglary, possession of stolen property, unauthorized surveillance, computer crimes related to his network communications, and abuse of a position of trust. The verdicts reflected the jury's recognition that Foster's actions constituted serious criminal behavior that had harmed multiple victims over an extended period. The jury in Davidson's trial reached similar conclusions on August 25th, finding him guilty of conspiracy, accessory to Foster's crimes, abuse of his administrative position, and obstruction of justice for his role in dismissing and mishandling reports about Foster's behavior. The verdicts acknowledged that Davidson's position had made him not just an accomplice, but an essential enabler of the harm that had occurred. Sentencing hearings for both men were scheduled for late September, allowing victims and their families to prepare impact statements. The hearings would provide an opportunity for those harmed by Foster's and Davidson's actions to address the court directly, explaining how these violations had affected their lives and their sense of safety and trust. The broader investigation into the network Foster had communicated with continued beyond the Springfield trials. Federal prosecutors filed charges against 8 of the 12 individuals identified through Foster's communications, with cases proceeding in multiple jurisdictions. Several defendants accepted plea agreements in exchange for cooperation and testimony against others. The network's exposure and disruption represented a significant victory for child protection efforts, though investigators remained vigilant for other similar groups that might exist. Lincoln Middle School, meanwhile, continued implementing the reforms initiated after Foster's arrest. The physical structure of the building had been modified to eliminate isolated spaces and improve visibility. Comprehensive security systems now monitored all areas where students and staff interacted. Every staff member and volunteer underwent extensive background checks that included contact with previous employers and professional references beyond simple criminal history searches. The school district established new protocols for reporting and investigating concerns about staff behavior. A dedicated hotline allowed students, parents, and staff to report concerns confidentially. An external review board provided oversight of investigations, ensuring that complaints weren't dismissed or inadequately addressed. Mandatory training programs educated all staff about recognizing grooming behaviors, maintaining appropriate boundaries, and understanding their legal obligations to report suspected abuse. Timothy Clark continued his work as head custodian at Lincoln Middle School, though the building felt different to him now. The discovery he had made that March day had transformed his understanding of the institution and the potential for harm that could exist even in seemingly safe environments. School administrators and community members regularly expressed gratitude for his vigilance, but Clark remained modest about his role, insisting he had simply done what anyone should do when confronted with evidence of wrongdoing. The sentencing hearings began on September 20th, 2019. Over 2 days, the court heard impact statements from victims and their families, each testimony adding to the portrait of harm caused by Foster's and Davidson's actions. Parents described their children's struggles with trust and feelings of safety. Students, some now in high school, explained how the violations had affected their education and their relationships. The cumulative weight of these statements made clear that the damage extended far beyond the theft of personal items. Judge William Roberts presided over both sentencing hearings with gravity appropriate to the case's significance. After hearing all testimony and considering sentencing guidelines, the judge imposed sentences designed to reflect both punishment and protection of the community. Gregory Foster received 18 years in prison without possibility of parole, ensuring he would serve substantial time and be well into his 60s before release. Mark Davidson received 12 years, with eligibility for parole after serving 85% of the sentence. Judge Roberts accompanied the sentences with statements about the abuse of trust that both men had committed. He emphasized that educators and school administrators occupy positions of tremendous responsibility and that violations of that trust deserve serious consequences. The sentences sent a clear message about how the justice system would respond to predatory behavior enabled by institutional access. Beyond the criminal proceedings, civil litigation continued. The school district reached settlement agreements with affected families, providing compensation for the harm caused and acknowledging the institutional failures that had allowed Foster's behavior to continue. These settlements, while not erasing the damage done, provided resources for counseling and support that victims needed as they processed their experiences. The case established important precedents for how schools and law enforcement would handle future situations involving potential predatory behavior by educators. The investigation's success demonstrated the importance of thorough evidence preservation, coordination between local and federal authorities, and willingness to pursue cases even when they involved respected community members in positions of trust. As 2019 drew to a close, the community of Springfield continued the long process of healing and rebuilding trust in institutions that had been compromised. Lincoln Middle School, once the site of calculated predatory behavior, became a model for implementing protective measures and creating cultures where students felt safe reporting concerns. The reforms implemented there spread to other schools throughout the district and eventually influenced policy discussions at the state level. Timothy Clark's discovery on that March afternoon had initiated a chain of events that exposed not just one predator, but an entire network. Not just individual crimes, but systemic failures. Not just past harm, but ongoing risk that required sustained vigilance to address. The case served as a reminder that protecting children requires constant attention, proper systems, and the courage to investigate thoroughly when warning signs appear. The path from discovery to justice had been long and difficult, but the commitment to seeing it through had ultimately prevailed, bringing accountability for past harm and establishing foundations for better protection in the future.